Great. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to today's briefing. I think this has been fascinating to hear kind of new voices about equal pay, where we're seeing wage gaps, how it's working. Has anybody else in here been, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but noticed the fact that a lot of these stats, no matter what field they're coming from, are kind of the same? Where you hear a lot of 77s, 78s, 80%. To me, in some respects, that's very reassuring because it's showing that, yes, obviously we know that there's a gap, but we're seeing exactly kind of the mechanics of it, which I think is really useful moving forward. I also think it's really fascinating to think about this from a different perspective in terms of the health impact of it. Exactly what is the impact of not making a fair day's wage. And some of that obviously can be emotional, but other times it's physical, and certainly absolutely related to what you can and cannot afford to purchase for yourself and your family in terms of making ends meet. So that's, I think, a new and emerging theme that we can talk about in terms of making the case for fair pay and for fair pay legislation. As you know, the American Association of University Women has been working on this issue for a very long time. This is an issue, I think, that we first started talking about back in 1913. And so in that sense, we were talking to the Women's Bureau about reclassifying women's work. And I think that in that sense, we're both experts on the issue, but we're also ready to draw it to a close, if you know what I mean. At the same time, we also know that there's work to be done, and there's a lot of things happening at AAUW that we have undertaken in order to kind of continue the very necessary public education that we need to continue making progress and close the pay gap. One of the things, of course, is the Simple Truth booklet, which I hope all of you have gotten. One of the things we tried to do with that was really show people kind of common answers to common questions, right? When you're talking to your friends, or you're talking to your family, or you're talking to people in your offices, and you're trying to make the case about why there's a wage gap and what we need to do to address it, you get a lot of these questions, right? You get well, what about women's choices, right? I like the air quotes as well. What about comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, making sure that your comparisons are accurate. I will tell you that's one of the things that I really like about AAUW's research behind the pay gap, because that really took from a database looking at apples to apples. And if you compare men and women 1 year out of college, right, the time when probably we're the most similar, 1 year out of college, same major, going into the same field, there's already a 5% gap. 1 year out of school, right? Now, we know there are different reasons that contribute to the pay gap, but we do know, unfortunately, that one of them is discrimination. One of them literally is some bias involved in terms of women in the workplace, and that's really what we want to get to in terms of our efforts. Some other things are going on, obviously, this week, tomorrow in particular, is Equal Pay Day. And AAUW has always done a lot of fun things with this particular day. There are unhappy hours with different kinds of happy hour specials. We're actually having one here tomorrow night at Blackfin. We also have bake sales, which I know sound kind of funny, but what we do with the bake sales is we charge the men $1 and the women 77 cents for their cookies. And if you want to raise awareness, then mess with men's baked goods, because that really gets their notice. And so that's a really good way of kind of just raising awareness. We'll have folks passing out payday candy bars at the Long Island Railroad. And most importantly, there will be just a flurry of opinion editorials around the country this week. AAUW has this wonderful thing called the Voices Project. And we've already had op-eds in the San Francisco Chronicle, the Houston Chronicle, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, my own home paper, and some others. And you will see a lot of them this week as a part of our efforts to kind of continue that drumbeat of discussion about equal pay. Now, part of the reason why we want to do that, of course, is because while there's absolutely legislation that is actually, in fact, being introduced tomorrow, and I'll talk about here in a second, one of the things that we do know is that obviously, as many of you know, things have changed a little bit on Capitol Hill. And so part of what we want to do is not only continue to have the conversation about our legislative remedies, but to also make sure that we are having conversations out in public about the kinds of things that we need to do to ensure that people understand not just the fact that there is a pay gap, but the fact that this actually impacts people's lives. This is something that undermines family economic security at a very real and a very personal level. So all of those things will be happening. Now, some other things that I think are exciting, obviously I mentioned there's legislation being introduced. The Paycheck Fairness Act was sponsored by the Dean of the Women in the Senate, Senator Barbara Mikulski, as well as Representative Rosa DeLauro, who is just a fierce pay equity champion, will be introduced tomorrow, as well as another bill called the Fair Pay Act, which is being sponsored by our own chairman of the Help Committee, Senator Tom Harkin, and that wonderful fighting voice for the District of Columbia, Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. So those two bills both introduced tomorrow, and these are companion bills in many respects that have been around for a while. Now, the one that you probably know the best is the Paycheck Fairness Act, right? Because we came this close, right? This close. It passed the House with a bipartisan majority, twice in fact, and then last fall, we came within 2 votes of breaking a filibuster of the bill, so we got 58. Obviously, in a perfect world, 58 would be a majority, but we're talking about the United States Senate, and as we all know, even from the last week, it's not a perfect world. I guess we should all be happy that we're even here today, actually, given everything that was happening. But the reality remains is that the Paycheck Fairness Act is a critical bill to move forward. Lots of folks, I think, misunderstood in some respects the Lilly Ledbetter bill, thinking that somehow that was a remedy to equal pay issues and why there's a pay gap, when in many respects it was really a bill that kept the doors open to the courthouses so that people could seek redress, but didn't necessarily get to the reasons as to why there's a wage gap to begin with. And so the Paycheck Fairness Act certainly does that in terms of being a bill that would actually amend the Fair Pay or the Equal Pay Act of 1963, and does a variety of things in terms of better deterrence, better data collection, puts in some salary negotiation skill workshops for women, which I think is important because we know that discrimination is part of the reason why there's a gap, but we also know that part of the reason why there's a gap is because sometimes women don't ask, and we need to get better at that. So I really like to make a deal with Congress that if we can get women to do their part in terms of asking, I would like Congress to do their part and pass these bills, right? I think that would be very good moving forward. So these things obviously are critical, and you will see continued things throughout this year and next as we work to move this bill forward. We are working with the administration on various options and opportunities to try and strengthen regulations and programs that the administration has. You will see new research coming out from AAUW as well as some of our groups, coalition partners. And you will see continued efforts in terms of moving this ball down the field. So I want all of you to continue to stay in touch with us via our website, particularly, I have to say, tomorrow, because we have a super secret special thing being released tomorrow that I think you'll all enjoy. So make sure you go to AAUW.org tomorrow and enjoy that with us. Last but not least, before I get to questions, I want to make sure that I thank a particular group of folks that are in the room. We talked about how long AAUW has been working on this issue. And of course, this isn't the only issue that we care about. There are lots of things that AAUW is committed to in terms of creating educational equity and economic security for women and girls. But there's a key group, and some of them are in the audience, that really make this happen. And for those of you who are Hill staffers, you probably have met several of them. And this is AAUW's Capitol Hill Lobby Corps. These are women who come to Congress every Thursday that Congress is in session and visit anywhere from 50 to 75, sometimes even 100 offices, depending on the issue, to urge co-sponsorship, to ask for a no vote, to whatever advocacy issue or question we have, they put it forward and put a very human face on these issues. So if I could just get the members of the Lobby Corps to stand up real quickly, I'd love to recognize you because you do fabulous work for us.